Hello. We should be live on our Savia Ventures LinkedIn. Just going to wait a minute to get a little thumbs up from Daniela, our amazing head of marketing at Savia. Make sure that we are present and live. Yes, I think we're here. So we're going to go ahead and get started. There's Katie. I'm going to welcome Katie. Katie, yay, so glad to have you here. We just went live. Let me know if you can see and hear us. Okay, awesome. Can you say something so I can make sure I can hear you?
Hello, hello.
Oh, yes, perfect. Okay, here we go. Well, I'll give a little intro first. My name is Tess Fenn. I'm so grateful to be a part of the Savia Ventures team. If you haven't learned of Savia yet, we have a thesis that Latin America is rich with talent, a lot of talent which is overlooked. And we are here to infuse capital and connections to amazing startup founders focused on climate in Latin America. And I've had the pleasure of meeting several of the founders that we've invested in thus far. And I'm so impressed with their ambition and the problems that they're solving, along with the creativity that they bring to the table. Now, I was brought onto the team at Savia because we found one central issue as we looked at our portfolio and where we wanted to go, which was that there was indeed a lack of women in leadership at the helm of these companies. And we want to make sure that's changed for the next pool of companies that we invest in. So we set up an award that is a first of its kind called the Savia Lotus Award. And we're so excited to be launching this as the first stepping stone to make a difference in the field of gender lens investing in climate tech in Latin America. And as I saw in our first round of applicants for the award, we had a lot of really great talent that has been overlooked. And it was actually quite difficult to pick a top even 22 to present to move forward to the next round of judging, because there was so many interesting projects, and we're just really excited to get to know these founders better and progress them to higher levels of global awareness and hopefully build their confidence, because as we know, as women, there are only so many times that we can have our dignity scraped away at before it starts to affect your confidence. And you need to surround yourself, I think, with other women like the two of you to remind us of our power. So that's why we're here today. And I'm really excited to have this conversation about this intersection, which is gender equity and climate equity, with the two of you who I respect so much. So now I'm going to let you each introduce yourself. We'll start with you, Elizabeth, since you had a little more time to warm up. Maybe just give an overview of what you do, what brought you to be an entrepreneur, and why you believe in the importance of female leadership in these kinds of fields.
Well, thank you for that warm introduction, Tess, and I'm excited to be here. I think that my story spans many decades of being told no, many decades of being told that not a good idea, you can't do that, it doesn't make any sense. and then really not having the tools that women need to really launch their businesses, launch their families, launch their passions. And what I have discovered over the years, so I work very predominant. I've spent majority of my life working very, very deeply in some very significant sized nonprofit organizations, and then went heavily into the tech space. So I've worked in mobile games for social impact. I've launched various companies in the tech sector and currently working very heavily in the AI sector, helping companies use the efficiencies of artificial intelligence to really propagate their goals within their organizations, which obviously includes everything that comes before that, including design and storytelling and all the aspects that make it significant. So it's not you go to the open AI and just get information that is of no service to the general goals of corporations, small companies, or individuals. Why I love this conversation is because I understand from having sat at that table for so long and being told that things are not possible, I understand what the tools are and the capital needed to help women really lead us into the future. And I have a strong vision for women leading the future of the world, not just companies. Thank you, Tess.
Beautiful. And just full disclosure, Elizabeth Sarquis is indeed my mother. So I owe a lot of my ambition, a lot of my worldview to her and her leadership. Was so lucky to grow up with a mom who had the courage to do brave things and overcome obstacles. She didn't go into her personal story, but she's a Colombian American, immigrated to this country, the US, as a young girl with a single mother, and um, faced having to learn a new language, having to assimilate into a culture where people looked more like Katie and I than her, and find her way to having her voice be heard. So, Mom, I'm very proud to be in this conversation with you today as your daughter. And I'm so excited to introduce you to one of my dearest friends that I've made in the last 10 years, somebody I've watched build her voice and career in climate investing. She is also one of the most celebrated women in climate. She is a partner at a incredible fund that she'll tell us a little bit more about. But Mom, this is Katie Hoffman. Katie, so happy to have you here and happy to have regeneration and you being at the forefront of our partnerships for Savia Lotus.
Well, first, I want to take a deep breath because Daniela, my mother would be so proud that I was in a conversation with the likes of this family and everything that you do and who you are. The story of where we come from is so important, right? And the roots, the soil, the nourishment. When you were speaking, it actually brought me back to being with my own mother, and I unfortunately lost her about 7 years ago, and in this dimension. But when you were speaking, it really reminded me of how we connect with each other, right? What the roots and values of our systems are, and how we build ecosystems so that we can navigate terrain, and also how our mothers are always present with us, and that's a non-negotiable. It doesn't matter if you're at the top of the ecosystem at CEO status and you're making deals that might affect generations to come, or if you are just at home cooking, it is something that is so important that we recognize. We are all part of this earth, and we are all part of each other, and our mamas are the best. So I just want to throw that out. Yeah, I think I got emotional. Sorry. So that is when you were talking to, I was like, whoa. I what a brilliant, beautiful human. And Tess, I mean, the honor and opportunity to get a chance to work and collaborate and build alongside this beautiful woman. I'm very excited, and I think that we're reshaping venture capital. It's been vulture to venture, right? So how do we actually reimagine the way that we invest capital? And that's part of the conversation today. And look, nobody is trying to cut anyone on the margins, right? Everybody knows that there's a system, currency, all of this. But how do we actually reimagine and think through the economic systems that work and serve our soil, our land, our people,
Yeah.
our mother?
Our mother, our physical mother, and our mother, this earth that we get to live and play on together. Well, thank you. You didn't mention anything about your role at Regeneration, so if you want
I got emotional.
That's what's most important. But I think it's important also to share a little bit about, the context of what you do, so that we can then move into the conversation and people can be aware of your background.
Absolutely. So for the last 15 years, I've been investing in companies that are mitigating carbon exposure as well as toxicity. So in public markets, private markets, and right now I am a founding partner in a venture capital firm called Regeneration. We invest in early stage companies eliminating waste and pollution in consumer markets, most specifically. So we look a lot at material science and how we can design waste in the first part of the equation when you're building a product, and then also how we can eliminate waste at the end of a product life cycle and recapture and or recirculate that waste.
Yeah, amazing. And Katie, you're also involved in a number of women's networks in the climate space, right? If you want to mention a few of those that have been instrumental or supportive of you in your position as a female leader in this space.
Yeah, and yes. Well, we started a group called Women Moving Markets around the UN General Assembly about 5 years ago, because the United Nations is as much as it has a very deep and profound effect on life, and I believe in that structure of governance, it doesn't tend to have the most female representation. or diverse representation, meaning female. And we started a group called Women Moving Markets. And honestly, the goal of which was, how do we share deals with each other? If there are blockers to getting capital to your startup, and you're thinking, hey, I must go through this pathway in order to get that capital, the UN and or a startup accelerator or what have you, who are the relationships, right? How do we actually create the network and mycelium effect where we can make sure that women in particular have access to the club? And the club meaning that what we've seen for centuries, which is a lot of folks, especially men, they make deals behind closed doors and then it's done. And I think it's very important that we also create a network where we invest in each other and we create the networks that enable that investment. We don't have to be super exclusive, but it's important to create those parameters and say, hey, okay, we also make those spaces and invest in each other.
Awesome. Thank you for outlining that. So I want to kind of dig into this topic and this primary question, which is, how do gender lens equity and climate equity intersect, and why are they related, right? Like why do you believe that it's actually important that we have women working on climate, and how are these two things at interplay with each other? I've of course been doing a lot of research on this, but just kind of curious to hear your takes on that. Elizabeth, intuitively, I know that you're more in the tech space and like that side of innovation as an entrepreneur, but you also come from a family of a lot of climate activists and people working on the ground for of these issues for many, many years. Shout out to our cousins in Colombia who have been working very hard on Amazon reforestation and preservation for many years. What is your perspective on that, and why do you think it's important to see women, having leadership positions given their perspective on climate?
Well, I'd like to start with saying that we as women are, we birth life. So we as women embody the birth of life. We as women need to be involved in this conversation always. Yes, I come from a family. My grandfather was a cattle rancher in a small town in Colombia. I saw many, my entire childhood when I had the opportunity every summer to go to Colombia. I was able to experience what the vast differences were and the focus on conserving the climate effect of negative things like cows. Like even as a 16-year-old, I didn't understand what that meant when where there was too many cows in a certain area and it was not enough water for this massive city of Bogota. And so, yeah, I had that privilege of being able to see all of that firsthand. And then coming back to the US and everything was always packaged. And I thought to myself, this is something that does not make any sense to me. And going forward into my life over the last 10 years, one of the biggest privileges I had was to be a part of our company. One of our companies is a B Corp. And if you understand what B corporations do and what they stand for, obviously one of the things they really care about is climate. And I'm part of a group of female CEOs that run B corporations. And one of those experiences, I was in New York and I was at Eileen Fisher's warehouse. And I didn't really know who Eileen Fisher was because, it wasn't a style that I was, always wearing or anything. But then when I learned what they were doing, and this was probably 10 years ago now, that they were taking fabric and recycling it to use it instead of throwing it. Started to get like just fascinating. Obviously, worked with a ton of B corporations, know a lot of them, most of them, and I'm very proud of the work that they do. And people don't understand that there is a tilting point, and that needs to be spoken about. So for me, being part of that group, standing up for women's rights, signing a letter that said, hey, we can't do the following things to women. I don't know if we can get political here in this conversation, so I'll stay away from that. But you know what I'm talking about. And we signed a letter, and it was in the New York Times. And and I think that just having also the great experience, two things really shaped my profound impact and my understanding of climate, and they weren't that far apart. One was about 15 years ago when I went to the Amazon in Colombia, and I got to meet people from various indigenous groups. And all of the people that led the groups were women. You would often think that it would only be men as shamans, but the women were the ones that were putting their whole villages together, finding where to get the food, how to produce everything for their families, and how to sustain themselves. And I always marveled at the fact that there was these houses on stilts, but they always had a direct TV satellite dish. And I thought, oh, okay, yeah, I get it. They got to do that. Apparently, everyone has to watch television. The stilts were obviously so that the houses wouldn't get flooded. But there was no motorboats. It was all like, canoes and very specific ways of traveling. And you saw some incredible things. Fast forward to a year ago, almost 1 year ago, I climbed one of the toughest mountains I've climbed. I'm an avid hiker. And I climbed a mountain in the Sierra Nevada mountains in Colombia. And we went to this place called the Ciudad Perdida, which is in English, the Lost City. It's where 4 indigenous groups meet every year. It was very physically challenging. That's
It's,
very good. Yeah.
to be clear, it's the Arhuaca people, it's the Wayu people, maybe, and who else are the other? What are the other indigenous communities there?
There's two others, and I'm sorry, I don't remember their names because, full disclosure, I recently had surgery, so I still have a little bit of a surgery brain.
Okay.
But, but, but what was amazing about it is that not only was it physically challenging, very incredible, but I learned a lot about what the government had done to the indigenous groups because of some issues with the narco trafficking and all of that. And they had sprayed the entire land. They had sprayed the entire land with pesticides, and it started to make the people sick. It started to kill the animals. It started to cause genetic mutations. And so now they are protected, and we need the people to be safe because they are the first Americans, and these groups of people have been around much longer than we have. And one of the things I learned when I finally made it to the top, which was amazing, is that every year in September they congregate and they have a meeting. And they told me last year that they already felt. I met with many shamans and many children and many women, and they said the vibrations of the earth are very angry, very angry. So we saw what happened after that, and we see what's happening now. So for me, it's like I see this, the gender issue and the climate change issue, as being so vitally important about life. The two come together about giving life. Without the one, we don't have the other. And women, we have the nurturing, we have the love, I think we need to lead with love. That's another, that angry feeling that the shamans were telling me about, that they could feel in the vibrations of the earth. Then we had wars happen shortly after that and during that time. So really contextually, just to summarize, I think that both are super related. There's so many practicalities I've done in my life. I've run an JUCO and ad tech platform that was completely focused on social impact companies. And then we planted trees. And oh, wow, what a great idea. Trees can really change the environment, guys. So there's simple things. So yes, I do spend a lot of time in the tech space, but I also spend a lot of time in nature. And you can't have anything in the world if you don't have nature. So I'm sorry, that's about all I should cover for now because I want to give Katie a chance to speak. I could go on for a very long time.
We are nature.
Yes.
Everything that you just described is simpatico, right? We have right now we have to over index a bit because we have gotten so far away from our roots and connectivity. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't have artificial intelligence. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't have data centers. It doesn't mean that we should not power our cities with the best technology possible.
Right.
It does mean that it has to be connected, and it has to be connected to source. And source is not just, okay, where can I build and extract X to make Y? It is around, okay, what is the community that I'm operating in? Who lives here, right? And if I'm going to have an electric powered vehicle that is, charged and awesome and has all of the artificial intelligence in the world, how is it connected to the very minerals that have been extracted in order to enable that technology, and who is taking care of that, and what does that look like, right? And I think everything that you just spoke about really resonates from my perspective on the venture capital side, because we're always looking for hockey stick returns, and that makes a lot of sense, right? We come in, we're less than 1.5. We meaning venture capital globally, less than 1.5% of GDP. Yet we have more than, I think, 90% of the S&P 500 in terms of scope, right? Like in terms of where initial investment, that is. And you think about that, and you look at it and you say, okay, where can we actually make an impact in the capital markets? And venture seems to be quite viable for that, and also needs a lot of cultural shift, because it has been high stakes, high reward, and then also, if you don't win, you don't win. Yet there's so much what is the word I'm looking for? It's fodder, but it's also a dynamic force, and I think that's the fertilizer is the word I was looking for. And when you were speaking, it made me think a lot about how our capital markets really do need to operate more on a component of collaboration, not just women, right? Look, I think that all of us have been in conversations where it's about women, right? And women do move markets. Sometimes we're in front, sometimes we're, behind. We're constantly there. We are the soil, we are the nutrients. And the question then becomes, how do we do this better, looking at what the next several decades will be for this planet in an interconnected world? Things are hotter and things are colder, right? We've had a transcendent El Nino season. And scientifically, it doesn't look great. However, we have all of the ingredients to make it great. And I guess that's where women tend to band together, but I would welcome more men and everyone into the conversation of how we can really look at the market gap and where capital is flowing, because trillions of dollars are being spent in directions that are not necessarily putting human or all species life at the forefront. and that's necessary at this point. So we need to cultivate that.
Yeah, beautifully said. As you were speaking, it made me think about how our natural environment should be a main character in the room at all conversations, right? Thinking about designing a city where you were talking about, yes, we should have the most innovative technologies, but we should also be thinking about, what is this land designed to be? Is it designed to be a place to connect with the ocean? Then the central point of that city should be that ocean, right? And I'm just excited to dive a little deeper into this conversation with the two of you. One of the questions I think is important to address is, if we're talking to women considering entering the climate space as entrepreneurs, what do you think are the current obstacles for them? And then the follow-up question is going to be, how do we combat those obstacles? But I think it's important to address those concerns because they're real, right? They're not just made up in people's minds. So what are the current challenges that women face as they begin companies in the climate tech or climate sector?
I don't really think that there's any barriers to women doing any of what you mentioned, because I believe and I think that, the other aspect of that is we can kind of remove the word tech from it, in the sense that, technology is just an aid to help us do things, because you know the internet was invented, all the things that have happened, and every new evolution of technology is meant to assist us, not to detract from our lives if used well. But I think it's more about what Katie was talking about. It's more about really understanding that everything we do, I learned a ton from my kids. So as much as they learned from me, I learned from them. I learned about the fact that what was recycling. Like when they were little, I was like, what the heck is recycling? And so why does that matter? And I think that conversation has been lost. And so then we start to use these big words like climate and tech and putting them together, and then everyone gets like, oh wow, what is that, right? So I'd like to just say that what Katie was saying to me makes a lot of sense. So having more women that understand investing in women who are working in companies to reduce waste, to reduce and all of the pollutants and toxins, and fighting against governments that are massively doing it is very difficult. So working with the UN is awesome. ESGs are awesome, but achieving those, goals, that needs to go beyond just a stamp or just a certificate. And I think the way to do it, I don't have the answer. I wish I did, but I think one of the fundamental ways to do it is to get more of us in the room together and create exactly what you're doing, Tess. Exactly what you're doing. To create these communities which then grow, and then to reward them and to back them. You know that I back a lot of micro businesses in Colombia, right? And and the leaders, maybe the initially starts out as the husband, but really the true leader behind it is always the woman. And I invest because I know that that person is going to do all the due diligence and really get the products out the door. And if there's a choice between using a plastic bottle, for example, in this one beverage company, versus a glass bottle, don't just show me the numbers, guys. You can increase your price because it's handmade and it's an artisan craft. And B, you can get a glass jar, and we can work out partnerships with all these major other, in this case, Colombian companies that could provide this for you, right? So I think that what you're doing is the only way, absolutely the only way. And I think having Katie, having a person like Katie in the room. What an honor, Katie, to know you and meet you. I read a bit about your work. And yes, I mean, gosh, we need that. We need people that understand the financial markets and that aren't just going to sugarcoat it and say, we're going to continue doing things the same way we've always done it. Guys, we have to stop being mandated by the current protocol. It doesn't work. We know it doesn't work because that's why we're here today. And like when I walk in, I spent half of my time in New York City. I just became a grandma and I'm so excited. And my granddaughter, she's like amazing. So I see life growing and growing. And I see the sign every day I walk past because we live right near Union Square. And there's a sign and it counts down. And initially, when I was there, I was like, what does this mean? And there's this big ticker and it's like the number of days, the number of minutes, the number of seconds. And I'm like, for what? Before we can't reverse the effects of climate change. And there's not a lot of time. I don't know what it says today, probably 5 years and something. But
Yeah, it's in the fives. We're
yeah,
getting close to the fives, which is not good. But
yeah.
also we should live in that scarcity because I do think the question and what you just amplified, which is so beautiful, is community. If you want to build a company, I mean, what when you first built, I don't know, whatever mixture that helped with your hair, right? You went to your sister, your nana, what have you, like your concoction, right? If you're an entrepreneur and you actually are trying to think through how to solve a problem, hey, speaking as a curly haired gal, like what is the thing that's going to make this a little smoother? I'm going to figure this out. And then you go to the people around you and you say, hey, does this work? Like, can we make this better? And
Yeah.
that amplified is actually what markets are looking for, which is not a derivative function, but a human function of how we build real products that serve real communities in their geography where they're at. And I think that and I saw a few notes here, any on notes for entrepreneurs that are building within their community. Your community is your family, right? So those are the people within, like, the 10 people that you interact with on a day-to-day basis. Those should be the people that you are testing your idea with safely. Venture capital is not that. Those are folks, we are folks that will look at your back end plan and we will go very, very deep, but we are not your community. Test what you are building with your people first and ensure that it is serving your people. Then it makes a lot of sense to bring in outside capital because you have a constellation around you. And I can't emphasize that enough because I, as a venture capitalist, do not believe in the venture capital model as it stands right now. I believe in investing in each other, and I believe in investing in solutions, and that comes from community. I do think that if you've got a great idea and you know that it's going to skyrocket, let's go, but make sure that you've got roots that are protecting you.
Yeah,
And,
beautifully said.
and Katie, I'd like to elaborate a little bit on that because one of the things, and I can't talk too much about it because it's still under NDA. It's not public yet. I'm working on a financial conversational AI that educates folks about different aspects of money. Let's just say 401ks to launch initially, and then there's going to be debt. There's going to be budgeting, all sorts of things. And you touched on something critical. People in general don't understand money. They definitely don't understand venture capital. And they don't understand what's needed. So what they don't understand, they're afraid of. And that's why you, as what you're doing in the VC space, is so vitally important because we can educate people on how to get there. They're very afraid. They're very scared. They're like, well, how do I even get money to do my business? And yes, they do have to test it out in their community. As a serial entrepreneur, I can tell you that you definitely have to have MVPs and all of those things. And you have
That's
to have
right.
the data. You have to have the data. You have to have, you have to have customers. You have to show that people want to buy, whether it's your product or whatever it is, you have to show that. And I loved the example that you said about the curly hair because I totally, that's one of the things that I like because it's like, you have no idea. I was always told, like, go do something about your hair. Now I don't even care. But it's like,
That is the best feeling in the world, right?
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
where
it is.
you actually,
It's,
we don't need to be sold more stuff that tells us to be different. So this is where VC has actually played the wrong role, right? Where all of the products that we've been sold typically have been backed by VC and then private equity and then acquired. And it's like, oh, be different. But actually, I think that we are in the business of how do we invest in what's profitable for our future. And that means all of the things that are surplus to the planet and to our hair and to each other. And honestly, that to me is the best derivative function that ever existed. And we will calculate for that soon. I mean, it will be forced upon us, but I think that maybe, just maybe, venture capital will start to calculate, very soon. Sorry, I got very passionate very fast, but
yeah, no, that's so amazing. And if I could say one more thing to you, also, Katie, because I like the alignment here. I have to admit, I didn't expect it. I like the alignment that we have here because it's about, and going back to the nature aspect of it, you think about the food sources. So like I'm whole food plant based, and I didn't become, I didn't understand. For me, it was mostly for health reasons. But now, and I've always, like, even when my kids were little, they had a garden because I wanted to teach my kids. I see Tessa smiling, but yeah, I wanted them to understand that what they ate didn't come out of this box, because that was one of the biggest shocks for me as a child moving to the United States from Colombia. I was used to eating fresh food. And then when I came to the US, they started serving me like mashed potatoes out of a box and something called
and wrapped in plastic. Yeah.
like, and I was like in shock. And my mom thought I was going to die because I didn't like the food. But it was really, I was a student enough to understand that connection, you have to have a connection with the source of what's providing nutrients for you. And that goes beyond food, obviously. But it starts with food, so that you can, survive nutritionally. And so I think all of these things, regenerative farming, critical. Water supplies, my goodness, they're all being impacted. And this I have learned from one of my cousins who is a leader in climate, in the preservation of the Amazon in South America. And there's a fund that supports the work that he does. It's a European based fund. I think it's like an $80 million fund. Great. But it's like about it's scary. His work is scary. He gets off of a plane and he has many different groups pointing guns at him because everyone has a different interest. I want to cut down trees. Oh, you're, military. So there's a lot of reasons why people don't do that kind of work, because it's very scary. So we need to teach from the ground up. And the community aspect, I think it has to start in school.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's where we hit hard. I think that that's where, there's some things that can be. I'm sure there's a lot of really smart entrepreneurs out there that can come up with some really great things, because I look at things like, yeah, sure, I come from a game development background too. So I look at things like Roblox, and kids create the coolest things. So
Yeah.
let them come up with plans for our world.
Mm-hmm. I recently was in New York for the Tribeca Film Festival, and I met a man who they're producing a great documentary about. And his work is essentially bringing farming into schools and bringing that culture of growing your food into schools in the Bronx. And he was one of my favorite people that I met during that experience. And to your point, that it starts in school. I think, this makes me, everything that you both have been saying makes me think about one of my favorite quotes, which is, eventually everything connects. this was actually the quote that we put as our main tenet for our company Juco that my mother and I co-founded, which was, about interacting with these B Corp companies through their ads about how they were making social change, and then through that planting trees. But this quote, eventually everything connects. Like, I think it's so true. Not only, does the fuel we put in our body then inform how we feel, which then informs what we can deliver to the world, right? As entrepreneurs, I think I've been thinking more and more about just how important our natural environment directly around us is. Our relationships, our physical health, our spiritual health, and all of that. And ironically, the best way to connect all of those things is through spending time outside in nature, connected with the land, like what you did, Mom, in the Sierra Nevada. But I want to ask, because of this question, everything connects. What do you think is the role of government and policymakers in these next steps? Unfortunately, like, we can't do it alone, right? So, what are some things that are happening in that space that you see as a positive trend, and what are some things that you think we still have yet to deliver on? I'm going to lean to Katie on this one, because I know you've been to several conferences. You're hearing all the thought leaders. What are you?
I took a little bit of time inside DC, but I yeah I and that's very specific to the U.S. context. So I just want to clarify that a lot of my opinions here come from that dimension of being from California, living in New York, and spending a lot of time in the District of Columbia. I think that we are in a very, very beautiful moment. I know that it seems intense and swampy, but the last 4 years on the back of pretty tumultuous years, there has been more legislation passed that is investing in infrastructure around climate and around, honestly, employment of women within spaces that are actually going to make decisions around how allocations happen. That's real. That is happening. It's happened. I know that the headlines are around Biden and all of this, but the administration recently, which is quite bipartisan in the U.S., passed significant legislation. 2.3 trillion, I believe, would be the tune of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, and then the CHIPS and Science Act. That alone has already gone through appropriations. So we know that there's going to be quite a bit of domestic spending on how we can organize ourselves for a future that makes sense here in terms of climate, and also in terms of reliance on, external mining and all of the things that we've been quite accustomed to, right? That have been quite destructive to the rest of the world, right? Cheap products come at a high cost. And I think that internalizing those costs is happening. And I think that these bills will also create jobs here in the United States and increase resiliency. And I think that they also will buffer support in areas where we would like to consider ourselves allies. That's the difficult, it changes by terrain. I am an ally of all human beings. I just want to say that upright. But we're in war time. This is real. There are multiple wars happening at once, and the United States has been a purveyor of weapons in those wars. My hope is that we can tamp that back and put that into domestic spending on how we innovate and become leaders in industry again. And I believe that with the bills that have been passed, we actually have an opportunity to do that. I do think, and this is just me thinking out loud, Tess, but I think that the more people that are activated in reality and are paying attention to real news, not just your Instagram scroll, not just what your friend tells you, but thinking deeply about what affects your community, not just the United States, but anywhere that you are, that is the best buffer against anything that's not democratic. More than half of the world is voting this year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That is insane. Like, and what we've seen though is that when folks are actually activated within their communities and they are talking to each other, not just through, oh, I saw this thing on Instagram, or, someone sent me this message. It's actually knowing your community. Then you have a more vibrant ecosystem to go back to nature, right? But like that's where the root system really is. And I think our policies will follow our, our dynamics as a civilization.
Absolutely. Elizabeth, I know that you studied poli-sci, and you're very engaged in sort of keeping yourself informed politically on the international scale. I want to ask you, because Savia obviously focuses on Latin America, what do you see as some of the I would say optimistic things that are happening in Latin American government in terms of climate action? And then, of course, I know that there have been some political leaders in Latin America who have the other opinions, and so yeah, just asking, what do you see as trends in Latin America? Personally, I've been really inspired by visiting countries like Costa Rica, where we were talking about the money being spent on war, and I was pleased to learn in Costa Rica how little money is spent on defense and how much money is spent on ecotourism. So yeah, just leaning to you, Mom, on what you've seen in the LATAM political landscape.
Yeah, the Latin American political landscape has always been kind of labeled by other places of the world as, third world, and I actually don't see that anymore. I think that there's some things that can be leggy. Maybe the Wi-Fi is not as fast in certain places, but I see Latin America as definitely leading. I see them as leading for the following reasons. One, look at I'm not from Mexico, but I love Mexico. We just elected a female president in Mexico. I say we, meaning it's a great thing for all of us, right? Well, and whatever you say about the political party that she's from and who put her in that position, it doesn't matter to me. She's a political leader. She's now the leader of one of the most important countries in the world. I see the vice president of Colombia as the first Afro-Colombian woman who's focused on exactly this topic, climate change. I see all of Central America. Costa Rica, for example, is obviously a blue zone, one of those places that you can get to live and have a better lifestyle. Well, why do you think that is? It's because of all of the factors that Katie and I have been talking about with you in this conversation. It has, yes, the ecotourism. Why are people drawn to that? It's called nature. And so I see, yes, we have problems in Venezuela. Yes, we have, there's a huge country called Brazil who has so much to offer, and the biodiversity there is obviously of great magnitude, very much like the Colombian landscape. We have Chile, Argentina. We have all of these countries, and I speak to so many entrepreneurs from these countries. Specifically, Argentina is going very, very. There's so many entrepreneurs coming out of Argentina right now as we speak. It's amazing. So for me, it's exciting. I think again, first president ever to be from the left side of the political spectrum in Colombia. That has never happened before. People are upset, people are happy. It depends on your position. But the point is that the change is happening and people care about their environment. Like the thing that they respect about their countries, you saw massive changes throughout Central America. There still needs to be a bit more work done there, but what they respect about their countries is how beautiful they are. Anytime you see advertising about a country in Latin America, they're not talking about like how many cars they're making or whatever. And there's Michelin restaurants. Predominantly, I've heard, I haven't been there yet, but I'll be going at the end of the month of August to Mexico City, and there's a lot of Michelin restaurants.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of whole food, plant-based, vegan restaurants. The movement where people are actually caring about this as this is how they want to be seen in the world. And I spent a long time at the Aspen Institute, long time meaning a week, and it was hard because I had to be in a room with a lot of thought leaders, very, very incredible people who were writing the playbook for how to scale Latin American businesses from X to X. And my message to them was always the same. And I think this is what Latin America is getting right now. And my message was, you have to change the narrative. You can't just be seen as people from Mexico are maids and house cleaners and this, and Colombians are narcos and beauty queens and whatever the stereotypical images that were always given to us. We needed to change that narrative, and so now I think it's changing. And so whenever a country in Latin America, displays themselves, they are talking about what they bring to the world.
Yeah,
and it's a bit.
I just like immediately want to jump in because I wanted to point out that Latin America is one of the most robust resource deposits of everything that we need to fuel our economy in everywhere else that's not, that space. So everything you were just talking about on, the surface level and all of this, but like mining rights, how we invest in the future of what mining looks like within the region. I think that's where groups like Savia and entrepreneurs that are really reimagining can come in and help guide. But it is one of the most resource rich places in the world, and it's something that we should not neglect when we think about policy, because that's probably why there's so much discord is what I would call it. But it's an important, they're resources that you can't get back once you extract them, just like the deep sea. So it's very important to recognize that the richness of the land is so critical, and policy should follow that, in my opinion, and so should investment, because that's the long game.
Yeah. So I want to touch on one more thing because we have only a few minutes left, but Colombia is actually hosting this year's Biodiversity COP. And we're considering if we can make it happen for the three of us to be there together. But why is that significant? Why is it significant for Colombia or somewhere in Latin America that was previously perceived as a country with a lot of issues and challenges, to be hosting such a grand scale international event?
Well, I can talk on the policy side, but
talk on the policy side.
Well, so just setting the context there, and then honestly, because of your depth of expertise, I would hope that you can bring us home. But the Kunming-Montreal Protocol, which was passed last year, and that was between kind of coexisting between Canada and China being a leader on that negotiation. of which they are not signed on to the other COP, which would be the UNFCCC, which is what we kind of know as COP, Paris Agreement, all of this, which is happening in Baku this year. They're actually happening staggered, which is October in Cali. Cali is one of, and Colombia, I think per square hectare, it's the most biodiverse place in the world, right? If you were to look at species. And also, it means that there is going to be a group of folks that are descending upon that space to negotiate what it looks like to legally protect nature and to honor the Kunming-Montreal Protocol, which is, protection of 30% of terrestrial land, 30% of oceans, and also, yeah, it's 30 by 30. That's I'll leave it there. But that's kind of the gist of what the protocol. And by the way, I think 198 countries have signed on. The U.S. has not. China has. So that's a very interesting, balance of power there. But it's really important because it's bringing nature into the forefront, and also it's placing it at the center of conventions that really make a difference in how we think about international law.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. I think international law comes into play really big in this area because what you just mentioned about China is 100% accurate. China is investing a lot of money in Latin America. China is also investing a lot of money in infrastructure in Colombia. So so we ask ourselves, why isn't the US doing that? And that's something that we need to, bring to the table and speak to our government officials in this country. It's been a relationship that's been strife with a lot of conflicts that are too lengthy to get into during this time. But that event, I'm sure, will shed a lot of light into why Colombia matters and why Latin America is in a position to really retain robustly the future of humanity. So I think it's going to be an amazing opportunity.
I hope we get to all be in person.
Yeah. Well, I hope we can be there together as well. And if not, Katie, you're an extension of my family, and I look forward to having you and my mother get to know each other as well. But thank you for this time and this beautiful
best introduction ever.
Yes.
Katie, are you in New York now, or which city?
I'm actually in a place called Paarl, South Africa.
Oh, so, nice. Okay, good.
I'm in the midst. That's why it's a little bit dark here.
But, it's dark night there.
Yeah. Okay, nice.
You are like a goddess among men, right? And the Savia Awards with Lotus, super excited to feature that and work on Climate Week together when everybody gathers in New York City.
Yes, I think we can officially call out that we're so excited to be partnering with Katie and Regeneration BC on their wonderful event that they're hosting. It's an all-day event at near Union Square, in fact.
Can you remind us of the dates, Tess?
Yeah, it's September 26th.
I'll be there.
And that's when we will be recognizing the official winner of the Lotus Award for this year.
Great.
But there's a lot of applicants, and that only one winner means that there are so many others we can invest in. And I think that's been a big piece of the partnership. And what Tess and I have talked about is, even though there's one award, we are going to have a lot of venture capital and other forms of capital. I saw in the notes here, kind of asking about different funding mechanisms, and that is well noticed. And I think that we want to make sure that the right forms of capital are reaching the right forms of enterprise.
Exactly. And our team has been discussing that as well.
Ideas too of some VCs that we could invite as well, Tess. So
Okay, great.
let's get on that.
We'll get you involved in the committee.
Now that I'm back into the land of the life and breathing.
Exactly. Well, thank you both. I have a robot that's cleaning my house. That's
Okay.
making noise. But
I
I
wish you
appreciate
could
this
be.
conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I second that there's so much talent to be invested in this pool of applicants. You know, I'm really energized about a number of these companies, and you know, they're not unfortunately all going to win this award, but there will be other opportunities for them to be celebrated and be recognized and share with each other their learnings and support one another. And as we talked about how important community is, I'm hoping we can provide that space to an extent for these incredible women. Thank you both for being in this conversation. And
Can I also say thank you to Andres and Matt? Because,
yes,
you know, Andres and Matt, I know you're not the same gender, but I really appreciate the fact that your eyes have seen what the rest of us know. And you are leading us down this path. We really are grateful for that, Andres and Matt. Thank you. Nice to meet you. Bye bye.
So lovely.